Chapter 4. War is good business. War is even better business after the war is over, especially if there was massive destruction on the order of the kind administered by the alien infestation. When humanity fought off its enemy, it found many of its cities ravaged. But like London after the Nazi air blitz of World War II, this was not necessarily a bad thing. Sure, some good buildings were destroyed by bombs in that case, but also destroyed were massive numbers of creaky docks and ancient buildings that should have met the wrecking ball years before. The result of the devastation? Reconstruction and a better city. Such was the case with the alien infestation. Take New York City, Manhattan in particular. It had been rotting for years, its roads and subways tottering on the brink of disaster. The extermination of the aliens had left behind many ruins and much potential. Nothing on the order of Los Angeles, which was still pretty much a smoking ruin, with odd nests of the creatures still needing to be wiped out. But the Big Apple needed a big overhaul. The US government, weak but still there, brought in two traditional weapons in this particular struggle: free enterprise and deregulation. Any entrepreneur, any company that had the stomach for it, were awarded the privilege of going in and wrestling with the wreckage and the building. A man named Daniel Grant not only had the company and the willpower for such a job, he had a cast iron stomach and platinum business nerves as well. Now Manhattan's towers were shiny again, and majestic bridges spanned the East River and the Hudson. Its subways were streamlined, and the aliens were all dead here, though not necessarily all the vermin. Rats, like Daniel Grant, were survivors. Although his chic East Side penthouse was only 10 blocks away from the infamous Grant Tower, Daniel Grant always had himself driven to work in one of his sleek fleet of robo-chauffeured turbo-stretch limos. You had to put on a show. You needed leverage for business deals. Flash and illusion and glitz helped gain leverage. Sometimes, when the numbers in your bank account were either preceded by negatives or promises, flash and illusion and glitz were all you had. This was why Daniel Grant always made sure that he entered his building through the front door, so that the spectacle was available to the local media. Today was a brisk spring day in Manhattan, and Grant had his window open so that he could see his tower as he approached. God, it was gorgeous. A hunk of gleaming obsidian thrusting up towards the sky from the famously firm island bedrock, Grant Tower dwarfed its surrounding midtown neighbors. Of course, a lot of these were still in twisted ruins, which gave Daniel Grant's skyscraper the edge. In fact, it looked like a streamlined monument in an urban cemetery. Still, Grant only had to look at it to feel like the top dog, the king of the hill, the Duke of New York. "Nice day for a skyscraper, eh?" he said to his female companion, tucked away in the plush, dim corner. Candy, or was it Bambi, barely looked up from her compact mirror. "Very impressive, Mr. Grant." She glanced at the erect structure, nodded and winked coyly. "Reminds me of last night." She extended a long, sleek leg and teased his ankle lightly. Grant smiled, glorying as much in his own manly scent as in the mists of perfume and femininity that wafted his way from this choice little bundle of boobs and buttocks and blonde hair that he'd bedded down with last night, after the de rigueur champagne, caviar, and camera clicks. Hopefully, his nightclub antics would make spy sheet again this month. Let his competitors think he had money to burn. Which, of course, he didn't. These days, though, the news hounds checked your clothes and your chicks. Not, fortunately, your checkbooks. "You're the best, honey," he said, as the limo smoothly cruised up to the new permacrete fronting of the GT. "You won't forget my number, will you, Danny?" Grant tapped his sternum. "Your digits are stamped on my heart, babe." He pulled out a Micro C card, tapped in a 500 credbuck limit for the day, and tucked it into her sweet palm. "Go buy yourself something nice, sugar cheeks." "Oh, Danny, thank you." He got a face full of lips and bosom for his effort. "Gotta be at Lipschitz and Garfunkel's in Brooklyn Heights, though, sweet cakes. The car will take you there, and then back to your digs." He puffed up importantly. "But I'm going to need it at 12:30 for an important date." Actually, he had the thing leased out through his car service. But an important man had to look like he had full use of his limo, right? "No problem. And remember what I told you if you see any signs of aliens." She nodded her head importantly. "Call you." Her voice was slightly and unpleasantly squeaky, and as he began to open the door and some sunlight got at her, he realized it didn't flatter her as much as candlelight did. Unlikely she'd see any aliens, but you never knew. "That's right, darling. Last night was wonderful. I wish our time had never ended, but even billionaires have to work. Probably harder than most people." He swept off the seat carefully so he wouldn't crease his trousers. "Ciao, baby." She blew him a kiss just as the clatter and flashes of cameras began. Nimbly, he jumped so that a few photographic images would record décolletage and blonde tresses for his ex-wife as much as the envious male competitors, and then he shut the door. The robo-limo smoothed off towards Brooklyn Heights and the perma-thrift department store he owned. Fortunately, Candy, Bambi, was far too dumb to know the difference between new merchandise and restructured merchandise. Daniel Grant swiveled around to greet the chroniclers of his arrival, trying to look annoyed. "Can't a busy man have any privacy?" he groused, straightening his power neck jewelry so that it would look just right in the pictures. Daniel Grant was sheathed in his usual sartorial splendor. His tailored camel hair coat hung over his tailored suit perfectly. Every angle and nook and color complementing the jut of his square jaw, the tilt of his brain-filled brow, the steely slate of his penetrating eyes. Even the tussle of his hair was follicle calculated to be photogenic. Today, even Grant was surprised. There were usually one or two people here to record his arrival and to ask a few questions. Today, there was a mob. From the corner of his eye, he caught a reporter with a new face and an old question. "Mr. Grant, how do you account for your meteoric rise to success? What's your secret?" Grant paused, lifted his hand like a heckled but patient monarch, requesting heed for his proclamation. He went into an automatic speechifying mode. Mental tables appeared before his eyes. He chose from column A and column B. "No secret. I just make a point of proving an old saying. You can learn something new every day." Phew. What did that mean? Sounded damned good, though. "Mr. Grant, what led to the recent split between you and your last wife?" "No comment." "Can you confirm rumors that you are planning to enter politics?" Of course not. Loved those kind of questions. You gave a definite answer that didn't mean a goddamned thing. Who was that young lady you drove up with? A slight smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. A friend. Is it true that your financial empire is in trouble? He feigned total astonishment. Where did you hear that one? Mr. Grant, could you comment on the alleged lethal side effects of your new wonder drug? Oops. Time to check column C. As there was nothing appropriate there, he just had to wing it. I'm unaware of such reports. A lie. But he honestly didn't think the wonder drug actually was lethal. But these impromptu news conferences were no place for complex ethical and biochemical delineations. I have full confidence in all my employees, especially those hard-working people at Neo Farm. Yes, that good old tried and true method. Head 'em off at the track with a statement. In a legitimate question and answer session, Grant could keep up the palaver for so long, a reporter was lucky to remember his name, much less his original question. Still, it was an alarming question, one that he really hadn't been ready to deal with, despite the news reports. Time to beat the retreat. He spun around on the sole of his spit-polished wingtips, again a busy businessman, immersed in the burdens of accruing riches, and stamped away, letting the hail of further questions slip off him. He dodged between two uniformed, sunglassed guards, into the building, waggling the finger of command. The thick-necked men stepped between the press and the door, preventing them from further pursuit. Grant stepped into the marbled halls of the first floor and made a hasty hop and skip for his special turbo elevator. He put his face up against a window for a retinal read, even as he placed his thumb into a hole for a quick DNA check. In this kind of political and economic atmosphere, you just couldn't be too careful. The car closed behind him, and he punched a button. Thus, he was zoomed down to the basement offices and the labs of his principal company, the foundation from which Daniel Grant had boosted into the wheeler-dealer stratospheres. Neo Farm. When he'd sent the message via subspace to his folks on Beta Centauri colony that he'd used the money they'd given him to purchase a little-known drug company, his old man had thought he'd said, "bought the farm," and thought he was dead. From a friend back on the colony, he'd heard the old fart had just shrugged and poured himself another boost of booze. Fortunately, his mother had replayed the message and gotten the true gist of the message before she poured herself another drink. Then, in celebration, they'd bought everyone at the bar a drink and promptly gotten stinking drunk. Of course, with the Grants, that was nothing new. They drank so much at the new town bar, the old man went ahead and bought it to minimize expenditure. Daniel Grant had to convince his father that the loan was a good business investment by sharing several bottles of cognac with the man. Over multiple ounces of the gut-searing stuff, Grant had pointed out that the alien-torn Earth, now in reconstruction, was ripe for business opportunities. A man who had vision there could have immense power. Old man Grant wasn't so sure of the financial soundness of his son's plan, but he did have money. Money that he wasn't sure what to do with. "Lend me some of that money, Pop," said Daniel Grant, "and let me show you what I can do." Daniel Grant had the money transferred to an Earth bank before his father sobered up, and then followed immediately thereafter by a slower route. The new Earth was violent and exciting and dynamic, a phoenix rising from ashes. World governments bent over backward to encourage growth. Restrictions were cut. Regulations either forgotten, ignored, or repealed. It was the freest market imaginable, and Grant studied it. He decided that what Earth people really needed, and would always need, were pharmaceuticals. Aspirin for headaches, harder drugs for those harder to deal with biochemical problems, euphorics, other mood alterers, and, with a crack team of scientists at his bidding, he could map out new directions of biochemical technology. So, he bought the farm. Since Neopharm was one of the few drug companies still operating, under the helm of Grant's cunning and ruthlessness, unbounded by law or ethics, it burgeoned. Cash and credit flow were astounding. Grant expanded, buying out other companies, building himself an empire. Real estate, retail, hotels, space shuttles, even gambling casinos. Daniel Grant wanted to make a strong, swift impression. Unfortunately, his first buy remained his best. None of the other companies did anywhere near as well as Neopharm, and often he found himself dipping into NP's black ink to try to neutralize the other company's red ink. If something happened to Neopharm, some financial disaster like a successful class action suit or, shudder, having to shut down production of Fire, their most popular product, then the whole card castle would crumple. And he wouldn't be able to make certain personal payments. Failure would not just mean bankruptcy. His ass was on the line. Damn it, he thought as the doors shut behind him. He'd paid back the old man. He'd pay his other debts, and he'd still have his cake and eat it, even if it choked him. The door whispered open before him, and the familiar subdued colours throbbed over him. The acidic smells of the lab assaulted his nostrils. As always, he could almost taste the freaking bugs down here. At first, he thought the taste was sweet, because it tasted like money. Now, Daniel Grant wasn't so sure. He stalked across the catwalk that spanned a pit where biochem workers in silvery suits worked over tables and tanks. Along the walls were aquariums filled with pickled bugs. Whole bugs, half bugs, bits and pieces of bugs. And the hellish bug juice, their acid blood, was carefully controlled, the vicious stuff. That was why the technicians worked in the specially lined pit. Anything that got loose, you could just sluice it away, and it couldn't get into where it would damage things or kill people.
"Mr. Grant!"
called an alarmed technician from the floor below.
"You're not wearing your suit!"
"Well, just don't squirt me, guys," said Grant sarcastically. "Is Wyckoff in?"
"Yes, sir. He's up in your office."
Great. Now, about the doctor's blood. Does that stuff burn through human flesh?
"Not that we know of, sir."
Good. I won't need a suit with him then. Helmeted heads swiveled and hooded looks exchanged. Grant grinned to himself. Let them talk, keep them on their toes. He finished crossing the pit and entered the bank of offices belonging to the scientists of the firm. Here the air was tinged with a sweetener to clear out the bug stench. But still, the stuff hovered. A door labelled Dr. Patrick Wyckoff loomed. Grant opened it, not bothering to knock. The little gnome of a man was huddled among a stack of paper. Paper everywhere, even covering his computer. Wyckoff liked to figure and doodle on paper. He was a whiz with computers, but for some reason the man far preferred a number 2 pencil and a cheap bond to scratch and fiddle with than one of these overpriced wang doodles he nevertheless insisted was vital to his operation. Wyckoff was so immersed in what he was doing, the shiny-headed, cobalt-nosed little munchkin didn't notice his chief coming into the door. "Wyckoff! Hey, look alive! I could be a bug!" He growled in his big, booming, I'm pissed off voice. "Worse, I'm your rampaging boss." The little man did a double take. His round Coke bottle glasses flashed in the indirect lighting. Jaw dropped. He stared at Grant for a moment, then recovered his aplomb. Good morning, Mr. Grant. I hadn't expected you so early," said the man in a nasal twang. Grant loped over and slapped a plastic news sheet from his home news service machine on the desk, featuring a highlighted article about the latest fire boo-boo. "But you did expect me, didn't you, Wyckoff?" Yes, sir. I knew you'd at least call. The truth is, I thought I'd hear from you yesterday, or the day before." "Maybe I just trusted my employees to do their job, to deal with this ridiculous matter. I didn't realize that I'd have a microphone shoved up my nose as soon as I'd stepped out of my car and be hounded by news of the lethalness of Xenozip." Wyckoff shook his head sorrowfully. "No, sir. Xenozip's perfectly fine." It was Grant's turn for a double take. He blinked, twisted his head around, and examined his scientist from another angle, as though to make sure he wasn't seeing some one-dimensional projection. "People seem to be reacting rather poorly for it to just be perfectly fine, Wyckoff." That's just it, sir. As soon as I heard the reports, I did a complete check of our supply. You may not have noticed, but your PR people have been doing their jobs." Wyckoff seemed to be back in control now, though he was still clearly intimidated by his ranting and raving employer. "They've put out the notification that these are counterfeit bottles of Xenozip that are affecting people poorly. Meanwhile, we're exploring the possibilities, and I believe we know what the problem is." "Well, why don't you tell me, instead of mincing words and hemming and hawing?" "Sir, it's the active ingredient." "Regal jam, you mean?" Royal jelly. Anyway, that's what we call it. There are so many equivalencies to the aliens and their nest hives and the earthly insect kingdom. Our supply is obtained by freelance mercenaries who destroy the many hives still around the world. We pay them to take the royal jelly first before they destroy the hive and pass it along to us. Yes, I know that. But as I said, our main supply of Xenozip is perfectly all right. The effect of a tiny amount of regular royal jelly combined with precipitant molecules of Queen Mother royal jelly ingested by a human being within the proper biochemical suspension is a safe serotonin booster and non-abrasive stimulant, improving perception and performance in nerve relay. Part of our work here is to either synthesize both or genetically create creatures that will manufacture both types of royal jelly without the less benevolent aspects of the aliens. We have introduced synthesized regular royal jelly already into the market. Even with the precipitant QM molecules in it, alas, it affects a percentage of users negatively. Why? We're not sure yet. Because you're a bunch of morons! That's why! Wyckoff looked chagrined. A pained expression was etched on his face, and he sighed. There is a possibility that these effects can be controlled by a higher QM jelly content. However, doing that would rapidly deplete our supply. Perhaps someone else can explain this to you better. He leaned over and thumbed a toggle. Dr. Begali? would you mind coming into my office and bring us some of those charts you showed me earlier? Mr. Grant desires the full scoop." "Begolly," said Grant. Yes, sir. The researcher you bribed to jump ship from MedTech." Grant grinned, remembering his coup. "Oh, yes. The bug expert. Cost me a pretty penny, but it was worth it, knowing I stomped on Foxnall's nose." "You did indeed. And believe me, sir, he's worth it. He not only has the best handle on the genetic makeup of the things, he's got unparalleled field experience and a grasp of the behavior of the things like I've never encountered before. As soon as he heard about this, little problem, he started an amazing amount of work in conjunction with our computers and the other scientists." Grant, who had felt a tantrum coming on, was intrigued. He found himself flopping into a former-fit chair and allowing himself to be served some soothing medicinal tea concocted by Neopharm, thankfully not derived from anything alien. The scientist who Wyckoff had summoned showed up with surprising speed, not even allowing Grant an edge of impatience. Dr. Amos Begolly slouched in, as though burdened by the computer-generated charts and diagrams he carried under one arm. "Morning," he whispered in a hoarse voice to Grant, almost seeming to bow in obeisance. If he didn't have the charts in his hands, Grant suspected that the man might rub his hands together in the manner of Uriah Heep. Grant grunted and leaned back, the expression on his face clearly communicating, "Show me." Begali's eyes flicked over to the pot of tea that Wyckoff had just brewed. "Might I trouble you for a cup of that tea?" he said. He coughed in an annoying, phlegmy fashion. But then, just about everything was annoying about Dr. Amos Begolly. Grant had always found him an unctuous, queasy worm, and would never have hired him at all but for his expertise, and the extreme harm it did to MedTech. He was a dark-complected man with limp black hair that looked greasy even when clean. It dropped down over a sloping forehead in ridiculous bangs, emphasizing an almost Neanderthal brow. Dark rings underlined dark, bloodshot eyes. Only in the center of those eyes could intelligence be discerned, intelligence of a searing, sneering variety that even thick-skinned Grant found a little unnerving. A weak mouth below a long, hooked nose twitched, showing a flash of eel-like teeth as he spoke. "Thank you," he said, accepting the steaming brew. He pulled out a small bottle of Xeno-Zip and took out a tablet, which he washed down with a gulp of tea. "Marvellous stuff, Mr. Grant. I would not be able to perform at my peak mental ability for such long hours without it." "Good to see you putting some of the money I give you back into the firm," said Grant. "But I'm a busy man, Begolly. You want to get on with this show and tell?" Begolly put the tea down and began to prop his charts up on an easel. He spoke in a hoarse, low, but audible voice as he did so. "Mr. Grant, I believe you are aware of my background and many other important things. But I do not believe you are aware of the amazing number of secrets comprised in the genetic makeup of these marvelous xenotropic creatures, so interwound with human experience." "I'm a businessman, you're a scientist. I have the money, you have your work." Indeed, indeed. But you have to understand something of what's going on here in order to have a grasp on not only the essence, but the cutting edge of this business." Slender, snaky fingers were tapping on a chart, which looked like some modern art collage of the alphabet, connected by lines and squiggles and the incomprehensible. Grant recognized it as an incredible tangle of genetic code, with some new symbols that had been invented just for the silicon-based segments of the alien creature's makeup. Begali gazed at it for a moment, absorbed and fascinated. He snapped out of it just before Grant was about to get mad. This is the closest we can get to an actual chart of typical alien DNA. There's so much we do not understand, so much to learn. Eagerness and awe crept into his voice. So much opportunity. But look what I have discovered, Mr. Grant. His eyes widened and he tapped the edge, where the code performed a curious curlicue. A goddamn crossword puzzle? Begali laughed, an oily laugh. The whole DNA is a puzzle, sir. But what this is nothing less than a recessive gene. Grant did not pretend to understand. Look, talk in English, will you? Mr. Grant, when we first started getting reports of the hyperactive results of some doses of Xenozip, I was among the batch of scientists who immediately investigated the biochemical reasons. The reason that some people have been reacting in this fashion to the drug is that their biochemistries are sensitive to the unique properties of the synthesized regular alien jelly. Yes, damn it, but what else are we going to use? We're running out of the natural stuff, right? We've got to synthesize the jam or jelly or whatever. Yes, sir, but if you'll allow me, there's more. Apparently the berserker antics were the result of a batch of Xenozip in which too much of the precipitant was introduced. What a waste. Indeed. Nonetheless, normal amounts still affect a portion of the populace negatively. So, what are we going to do? Begali shrugged. I, for one, would like to study the possibilities in this recessive gene. But what does that have to do with our problem? Mr. Grant, you're going to have to face up to facts. We need more royal jelly. And we need more Queen Mother royal jelly. At the moment, our understanding of the genetic makeup of the aliens is not sufficiently advanced to clone either. We need to go to the source. I have reason to believe that the DNA avenues I have been exploring could result in drug breakthroughs far beyond mere Xenozip. At the very least, we could obtain a source of the active ingredient in the cornerstone of your drug empire that would allow you to manufacture safe batches for a long, long time. And I have the feeling that the answer to my questions could lie at the source of what we need. The man nodded significantly, as though Grant was supposed to catch the significance from these words alone. Grant shook his head, jumped to his feet, and let the frustration out, full volume. Look, goddammit! I'm staring at the possibility of lawsuits buggering me from now till kingdom come. I'm going to hear from Sales as soon as those spineless assholes get up the courage. And you know what I'm going to hear? A drop-off of Sales for fire. That will kill the cash flow, which will kill Neopharm. And I'm in hock for everything else. He stalked nearer to the cowed scientists. And you're telling me I ought to give a rat's ass about a blip in a weird ladder. You're telling me that I've got to spend more money than God owns for a trip to an alien planet. Begali blinked and smiled uneasily. In every seeming disaster, there is incredible opportunity. And this particular discovery, well, sir, it simply reeks of it. What? Because it makes people as crazy as aliens? I just don't get you guys. I'm running a business here, not a non-profit research group. I'm in desperate straits. I need help, not homilies. I need... The vidphone chimed. Wyckoff jumped for it, as though for a lifeline to pull himself from the storm. Curiosity and deep respect for that demigod of the business world, the telephone, caused Grant to stop mid-spew. Begali watched the proceedings, engaged but more than a bit bemused. "Yes?" said Wyckoff. His eyes swung towards his employer, still wary and more than a bit relieved by the interruption. "Yes, he's here, but this is a..." He blinked. Oh, I see. Well, very well, I suppose. Yes, right away." Wyckoff turned to Grant and handed him the receiver. "It's General Burroughs of the United States Army, sir. Vital communication." As Daniel Grant reached for the vidphone volume button, he saw Begali's lips tilt up into a half smile, as though he'd expected something like this all the while.